4 minutes after the hour of 7 o'clock. I've got to give you a little bit of background before I continue on with the story so that it will all make sense to you. All radio stations are the same. All radio stations are completely different from one another. One of the areas that all radio stations are the same is that the personnel break down into primarily 4 different categories, 4 different departments, okay? We have the programming people, and it doesn't make any difference what the format of the station is. Programming is a pretty broad category. It would also include things like the people in the newsroom. If you have a newsroom, hardly anybody does anymore. In a situation like this, the guys on the other side of the glass are part of the programming department. Then you have the sales department. Well, okay, I'm somewhat ahead of myself. At every radio station, there are egomaniacs and people who are very insecure. These people all reside in the programming department. Then you have the sales department. The sales department of the radio station is really no different than whatever your industry is. The salespeople are basically, they break down into 2 categories, leaders and followers. Or I should say leader and followers. The leader is not necessarily the best salesperson, but the person who can intimidate, terrorize, and therefore motivate the other salespeople. We call him the sales manager. The salespeople live in utter fear. These are people who enjoy being kicked around, being abused, having doors slammed in their faces, and come back for more the following day. They're a very bizarre group of people. Then we have the administrative people. The administration, they're kind of bizarre people, too, because they know all the secrets that all the other people don't know. Like, you know, whether or not you're going to change format again, how much people make, how much they don't make, that kind of stuff. And strangely enough, the larger the organization, the bigger the market, the bigger the station within the big market, there is a phenomena, and that is that frequently there are 1 or more people in the programming department who make more money than the general manager. In smaller stations, in smaller markets, almost everybody makes the same amount of money because you can only go so low. And then you have the engineering department. And again, the engineering department, this department, it doesn't make any difference what the market is, what the station is. The engineering department are made up primarily of geeks who really get off on the fact that nobody knows or understands anything at all about what they do. And so they really enjoy goofing on, especially the general manager. They like going into his office, standing there shaking their heads and saying things like, I was up at the transmitter this morning. Chrome-plated muffler bearings, they're starting to rust. They're not going to last much longer. And watching the general manager pretend as though he knows what they're talking about. Because if he ever lets on that he doesn't know what they're talking about, then he is a cooked goose. So now you know the 4 different departments in a radio station, and primarily the personalities that you will find in these 4 different departments. Now, in these smaller markets and smaller stations, where almost everybody makes the same amount of money, there is a great deal of camaraderie. A great deal of camaraderie. People party together. People, they bond. Because their lives are all miserable. They don't have any money. They're all basically hoping for a bigger, better job somewhere. So they actually have something in common. The love of the industry. And the misery of the job. Now, the bigger and more successful the radio station, the greater the disparity amongst the employees. Some of the employees at a big station make money like you couldn't believe. You wouldn't dream of what some people make in this industry. But also at those very same stations, there are other people who make what they make at the small stations, and a lot of them. So they all hate each other. There's always a great deal of resentment. Because some people are making 6 or sometimes 7 figures, while other people are making 16,000, 15,000. It is very difficult to gather a group of people together in a room, some of whom are thinking about buying Picassos for Christmas for their loved ones, while others are trying to figure out how they're going to eat for Christmas because McDonald's is closed that day. This is where major problems can come up at a Christmas party. Well, the Christmas party that I will remember for as long as I live that I did not attend took place at one of these small stations. where everybody did, in essence, make the same amount of money, and where there was a great, great bond between most of the employees, except for, well, three. There were three employees who did not really bond with the rest. One was the general manager, because he was the owner's son. One was a man named David Fowler, who was a talk show host, and the third one, was a man named Lassiter, a talk show host. David Fowler is a man that many of you think that you know, and he's a man that many of you who think that you know him love. You love him because you don't know him. There is nothing lovable about David Fowler at all. He is a mean, vicious man who likes almost no one and who genuinely enjoys terrorizing people. Genuinely. I do not know why. I know David Fowler. I love David Fowler, because I'm one of the very few people in his life that he actually allowed into his life, who he did not try to terrorize. I spent many an hour with the man and genuinely love him, but I also understood him, and I also knew when it was time to go home. David was so mean. Everyone in this business has hangers-on and followers and groupies who want to be with you. Most of the people in the business more or less hold them off at arm's length. Then you have the exceptions like myself who hold them off at 2 arms' length. David took great, great pleasure in inviting them over to the house, where he would terrorize them. And fools that they were, they would come back. And he enjoyed it immensely. As a matter of fact, there are people at this radio station. Lionel is one that comes to mind, that bugged David, and David said, "Come on over to the house." And he did horrible things to him. Unspeakable things to him and his date. I have no idea who the date was at the time. But it's the kind of guy that he was. Well, let's get back to this Christmas party. I became first aware of the Christmas party sometime in the latter part of the fall. And I knew that if I did not attend the Christmas party, it would not look well and would not go well for me. For some strange reason, the other 3 departments feel as though they own people in the programming department. We're kind of trophies, and if we do not show up at various different functions, people notice that we're not there. And so, therefore, management usually twists your arm. Well, you've got to be there, Bob. If you're not there, what are people going to think? That kind of thing. So I knew that Don Richards was greatly overworked and had a tendency to allow things to slip through the cracks if no one kept on his back. And so sometime in November, the early part thereof, I said to Don, we've got to get somebody in to, do my show the night of the Christmas party. And he said, "Oh, yeah, I'll get to work on that." I knew that he would forget. And I knew that I would never, ever mention it again. And I then sat down and proceeded to sweat for the best part of a month, hoping that I was right and that he would forget. My wife, who was not yet my wife, set about organizing the party. She is a good woman, and she gives a fine party, thank you. And she made all of the arrangements, and the days ticked by and ticked by, and Don had forgotten. We were elated. We would have much rather been home alone that night than out partying with a WPLP crowd. It was now the morning of the party. My wife went into the general manager's office and said, "Well, here's the receipts for this. If there's a problem with this, call this number." General manager said, "Well, aren't you going to the party?" She said, "No." He said, "Why not?" She said, "Because Bob has to work tonight. And I thought it would be better if I, brought something over to him and Michael Serio, who was my board operator at the time. So they could, kind of enjoy the night." "Oh, this is terrible. We'll get..." And I don't know who the hell he mentioned. We'll get so-and-so to fill in for Bob tonight." And we were already prepared for this. And we said, no, that wouldn't be right. He was planning on going to the party. It wouldn't be right. Oh. We had gotten what we wanted. But what we were to get, no one anticipated. No one expected. It was to be a night that proved my little theory that no good can come from an office Christmas party, and great, great harm can result. Again, I've got to stop here for a second and give you a little bit of background. Let's go back to the programming department. There are primarily 4 types of individuals that work in the programming department. One of them would be the off-air people, the support staff, people like Flounder and Fingers and Spice and Mike and Jeff and all of the other board ops. These people are usually the lowest paid people at the radio station.
No kidding.
As a general rule of thumb, they are the nicest, sweetest, kindest people at the radio station. And again, as another general rule of thumb, they are usually some of the most knowledgeable people about the business at the radio station, and nobody pays any attention to them. And it's this way at every radio station, the exception being WLS. Their off-air people were jerks, but they were all management spies. So that kind of explains it. Then you have the people in the newsroom. Now, the people in the newsroom are usually idealists. They want to bring you the news and inform you and educate you and things of that nature. They're almost always nice people. They're almost always harmless people. Very, very rarely do you run into anybody with an ego problem or anything like that. So the newsroom rarely gives you any grief or aggravation. Then you have the on-air people, which basically break down into 2 groups, disc jockeys and talk show hosts. Disc jockeys are some of the most obnoxious people on the face of the earth. They, for some strange reason, think because they play someone else's art and read someone else's words that they're cool. They are people who usually have burned out of the business before they're 40 and end up working in gas stations. And usually, if they make $100 a week, spend $110. If they make $300 a week, they spend $325. If they make $50,000 a year, they spend $65,000. As a general rule of thumb, they overdress, buy cars far more expensive than they can afford, and live in expensive apartments with cheap rental furniture. And usually wear too much cologne. But they think because they can say things like, hey, 52 minutes after the hour, 89 degrees outside, the Beach Boys, that somehow their shot doesn't stink. It does, worse than anyone else's. Then you have the talk show host. The talk show host is normally thought of as being an arrogant, miserable son of a bitch. The fact of the matter is, the vast majority of us are basket cases who walk around in utter fear that we won't get any calls today. Oh, God, what if nobody calls? Oh. So all of the other people at the radio station think that we're, snobbish. Okay? It's now the night of the party. There are some traditions in this industry, some of them that you're aware of, or you should be aware of because you hear them. Most of the people in radio don't make very much money. And so, I don't know where it started or how it started, but there's a little benefit that goes with a job for the off-air people, and that is that once a year, they're allowed to go into the production room, usually sweating, usually after weeks of preparation, and give a Christmas greeting.
Hi, this is Angela in accounting. I just want to wish everybody a Merry Halloween. Christmas. Can I do that over again?
Nah, get out of here. Gotta get the guy in from bookkeeping.
WPLP did that, as we do, as virtually every radio station does. It's just kind of a little traditional thing in the industry. Plus, during the night of the Christmas party, for whatever reason I cannot begin to imagine, there just weren't that many people that worked there. I mean, we're talking about a place that employed like 20, 25 people. So the room that they held the party in wasn't very big. But every year, they would bring a sound system with them. And every year, after people had eaten, had 1, 2, 3 drinks, They would crank up the sound system, attach a microphone to it, and pass it around the room. And each individual would give Christmas greetings to the other people assembled in the room. Could have just as easily done it by just slightly raising your voice. But somehow it made it more special, and it had become a tradition at WPLP. 7:51. There's a phenomenon in this business that is difficult to explain. You sit at home and you listen to me or listen to Larson or The Brain or whoever, and you come to feel as though you know us and that you understand us. You don't. You only know what you are exposed to for 3 hours a day, or in the case of them, 2 or 2.5. But that's neither here nor there. Well, this very same phenomena occurs inside the building as well. The people that you work with don't really know you. And even if they do, they still think you are who you are on the air. This was the case at WPLP. On the air, David Fowler was warm, friendly, a compassionate man. Off the air, he was anything but. But the people at WPLP wanted to believe with all of their hearts that the man that they heard on the air was the real David Fowler. The absolute miserable son of a bitch they had to deal with off of the air was somehow, it was their fault. They brought out the worst in him. The meal had been served. The bar had been opened, and the annual tradition of passing the microphone around had begun. It was usually the general manager who made the first awkward remarks and then passed it off to the next person. And tradition had come to pass or be that David was the last one to get the microphone. David Fowler was a friend of mine, but I chose not to let David in on what the plan was and never mentioned to him the Christmas party that I would not be at, or why I would not be there, that it was my choosing. David didn't want to go to the Christmas party any more than I did, but felt the same obligation that I did, but wasn't smart enough to figure out how to beat the bastards at their game. He was quite surprised when he arrived and found out that I wasn't there, and he was more surprised when he found out why, because I had to work. David took great pride, as I've already told you, in hurting people and making them miserable. And when the microphone was finally passed to David that evening, he did what he would have normally done, and that is berate virtually everybody else who had spoken before him. He would do things, I don't know that these were his exact words that night, but it would not surprise me if they were, because I had heard him do things like this before. He would do things like have the microphone passed to him from perhaps the receptionist, and say something to the effect of, "Well, I thought she would never finish. It was one of the most whimpering, simpering displays of whatever." Perhaps exceeded only by Tony Venuto, the man before her who spoke, who was a plastic man that didn't mean a word that he said, who actually dislikes everyone in this room. David did it with such force and such believability, because he meant it, that he actually had many of the women in the room crying. And when he was finished insulting virtually everybody in the room personally and individually, he then launched into a "Where is Lassiter? Why isn't Lassiter here? What kind of an organization is this that would hold a Christmas party and not invite the most important employee to it?" And he went on and on and on. David had an incredible vocabulary and manner of speaking. He also used some of the most vile language you can begin to imagine. And when David used certain words, the windows shook. And he spoke with such command that no one else uttered a word. The room would fall silent because you never knew what he was going to say. And sometimes it was profound. And in any event, you were afraid to make a peep that you might draw his attention and therefore his wrath. He turned on the general manager and launched into a violent, obscenity-filled tirade telling him just what he thought of the fact that I wasn't at the Christmas party. Something happened that night that had never happened before. He became so ugly that several of the men that worked at the radio station took the microphone away from him and escorted him from the room out into the parking lot. He broke away, and he came back in. And without the aid of the microphone, which he didn't need anyway, he again launched into this unbelievable tirade, again obscenity-filled. Well, there was something different about this Christmas party than previous WPLP Christmas parties. The general manager's mother was in attendance from out of town. The young men who had escorted Fowler from the room were a few steps behind him, but made it back into the room and for a second time physically removed him, took him outside. He assured them that he was under control, that he had made a fool of himself and apologized, and that he was all right and would just be going home. They believed him and bid him good night and a Merry Christmas, and they went back inside. He came back in for a third time. I'm sorry. Louder and more obscene than before. Only this time, for no reason under the sun, launched into an attack against the general manager's mother. For the third time, they removed him from the room. And this time, I think somebody took him home. They weren't taking any more chances. The following morning, everyone arrived a little bit late, except Fowler, who was on the air at 9 o'clock. And when people arrived, the general manager's office was right off the receptionist's room. There was a note pinned to the door, and the note said, "Dear George, General Manager, I'm so sorry I could not attend the Christmas party last evening. I was a bit under the weather. However, my twin brother attended in my stead. I hope that he didn't do anything improper." Not a word was ever said. He got away with it. The son of a bitch got away with it. But that's one of the reasons why I am not attending tonight's Christmas party. And I just hope against hope that someone will keep that fine, fine tradition started by David Fowler alive and transfer it over to WFLA. So that someone, years from today, can tell a similar story to you and kill an hour with it.